Welcome back, everyone. It's Peter Tragos, the lawyer you know, and today we're going to break down the complaint Dave Portnoy, the founder of Barstool Sports, has filed against Business Insider and a couple of its writers for publishing what he says were known false stories about him. He filed a complaint alleging defamation, an invasion of privacy, suing them for compensatory and punitive damages. And we're going to talk about this complaint and how it may compare and contrast some to Cardi B's complaint, where she just went to trial and got $4 million from the YouTuber Tasha K. So thanks for joining in with us as always. This is a new case we're looking at, a brand new complaint that was filed this week. Most people know Dave Portnoy. His name is like a lightning rod on all media platforms. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how the fact that he puts his life out there may affect these charges and how he maybe acts on his podcast and on his shows and on Twitter, how that may affect a case like this. So we're going to break down what exact defamation is, what invasion of privacy is, and of course, we're going to talk about the crazy facts throughout the case because Dave Portnoy keeps receipts. He's not dumb. Nobody will ever accuse him of being stupid. He knows what kind of life he leads. He knows when all these Instagram models are sliding in his DMs that they may be a little opportunistic, and therefore he saves the receipts. He saves the DMs. He saves text messages. He saves videos. So a lot is going to come out in this case that many of us may think is embarrassing, but Dave Portnoy at this point may think it's worth it to clear his name. So if you're following along this case with us, make sure you subscribe to our channel, like the video if you are interested in more content on this complaint and this case. So let's jump right to the complaint. And unlike most complaints, we're not necessarily going to get into the beginning parts of it where we go through the introduction and the parties because we know the parties involved. It's basically Dave Portnoy and Business Insider. But there are a lot of aspects of this case that are different because of who the parties are, and we'll get to that. But generally speaking, the allegations surrounding this complaint are that Business Insider wrote and promoted two specific stories about how Dave Portnoy is basically a rapist, sexually abuses women, takes things too far, doesn't stop when they say no, and records these encounters without their permission. That's basically the gist, and we're going to get some specific instances of it. And it's really interesting because this is a complaint filed by Portnoy's lawyers, but it really looks a lot like some of the criminal complaints we've heard in the R. Kelly case, the Ghislaine Maxwell case, and some of these cases where we have a bunch of abuse victims, where we see a bunch of different allegations and stories written under pseudonyms for the alleged victims involved. What's also going to be really interesting about this is how many of these alleged victims are actually pulled into the limelight, deposed, information gotten from them, because that is going to make a big difference in this case. We all know that Cardi B, maybe we all don't know, but Cardi B sued Tasha K and some other YouTubers for defamation. And in that case, they falsely alleged that Cardi B was a stripper, had STDs, committed crimes, did drugs, things like that. And it came out in trial that Tasha K knew everything she was saying was false, but she did it anyway for entertainment purposes. And Cardi B was awarded $1.25 million, I think, in compensatory damages, meaning money she lost because of what they did to her reputation, and then $2.75-ish million in punitive damages to punish Tasha K. So this may be the new way of doing business for public figures when we have people on YouTube and Business Insider and other websites publishing articles maybe irresponsibly and maybe when they shouldn't have because of the clickbait, because of the entertainment value, because everyone is so bloodthirsty out there to read and hear stories like this. Okay? So let's talk about some of the allegations because, of course, as always, they're crazy, a little creepy, a little weird, and it's got to be embarrassing for some of this stuff to get out for Dave Portnoy. But I think in the back of his mind, he always knew that this was possible, that some of these women were going to try to take advantage of him, try to use him as a stepping stone for fame. We talked about it a little bit in the Drake Tabasco sauce case, how sometimes things like this happen and guys like Portnoy or Drake have to do things to protect themselves. Well, let's read what some of these women said allegedly about Dave Portnoy. The first one is Allison. So paragraph 26, and a lot of them are going to start out with, they slid in the DMs. Allison messaged Mr. Portnoy, notifying him that she was in Nantucket and would love to see him. Allison met Portnoy at his home where they spent the day by the pool. According to the defendants, Portnoy and Allison then began having violent sex. And you're going to hear a lot about violence in this complaint. The implication that the encounter was not consensual. He leaned in and started kissing me, and I didn't know what to do at that point. And we went upstairs, and he was really aggressive, and I didn't know what to do, and we had sex, and he kicked me out. She said Portnoy choked her. He kept spitting in my mouth, which is really gross. I was kind of scared. I didn't want to disappoint him. So they implied that it was not consensual, and it was so impermissibly violent as to constitute a sexual assault. Okay? Then we skip down some. Paragraph 28. Defendants published that Allison's mother reported Mr. Portnoy to the Nantucket Police Department and falsely suggested that he was under criminal investigation for sexual assault. Prior to publication, however, defendants were in possession of the so-called police report, which highlights the outrageous nature of the allegations that Allison's mother made against Mr. Portnoy, namely that he was often seen in public with younger women. Defendants failed to include these facts from the police report in the first story, and for good reason. The police report does not accuse Mr. Portnoy of any criminal conduct whatsoever. Paragraph 30. The day before Allison visited Mr. Portnoy, she begged him to come to her house. I'm on island with all my friends and really want to see you. Would do anything. Let's hang tonight. When Portnoy stated he was unavailable, Allison stated, no, it's your last week in Nantucket. The following day, Allison messaged Mr. Portnoy again and stated that she wanted to have sex with him. What you doing today? Can we bang? And then here are the actual text messages, which we're going to see throughout this case. A lot of DMs or text messages that Dave Portnoy is producing and putting in this complaint for the world to see. Allison and Portnoy made plans to see each other just prior to arriving at Mr. Portnoy's house. He texted her, don't be nervous, it'll be fun. And if you don't want to do anything, we won't. So having text messages like that, again, he's not stupid. He knows that this stuff is going to be saved, and he knows that he doesn't want to get himself in a situation where someone can even accuse him of things like this. After spending time at the pool, Mr. Portnoy and Allison had consensual sex in his home. Critically, and this is a big thing in a lot of the cases that even a lot of you commented when we went through, well, what happened after these encounters is really important. Did they go to the police? Did they tell anybody? Or did they continue to try to connect with the defendant? Critically, after Allison was allegedly in the hospital and suicidal due to her encounter with Mr. Portnoy, and allegedly from the Business Insider stories, she continued to contact him via text message and Instagram. None of her messages indicated that she was in any distress. In fact, Allison sought to continue her relationship with Mr. Portnoy. On August 1st, 2020, she replied to Mr. Portnoy's Instagram story, which announced he was leaving Nantucket, and she stated, "Aw, bye, Nantucket is better." After Mr. Portnoy responded to her unsolicited message, Allison replied, "I'm in shock that you're still DMing me right now. Like, what's up, Dave Portnoy?" The next day, she messaged him, "If you ever want to text me, my number is," and then she gave him her number. And this, again, was after she was purportedly hospitalized. And the last point on Allison is that they actually talked to the Nantucket police spokesperson, Lieutenant Angus MacVicker, and they issued a statement that Portnoy was not under any criminal investigation whatsoever. Why is this stuff important? Well, something like that, which is objective, not from Dave Portnoy. It's okay if Business Insider doesn't believe Dave Portnoy's side of the story. But when you have an unbiased third party, especially law enforcement, who says what you're putting in your story is false, that's a pretty good indication that you are going to be publishing and furthering something that is in fact false. There's two sides to every story. So if an alleged victim says something happened and an alleged defendant says something happened, you can pick a side that you believe if one's plausible or more plausible than the other. But usually if you're presented with some objective facts, that might change whether or not you're going to publish something because of libel and defamation. Next, we have Madison. All right, so paragraph 40. Madison traveled to visit Portnoy, and that's another common theme here. They're all going to see him at his home in Nantucket. Prior to visiting Mr. Portnoy, Madison messaged Portnoy for several weeks, wherein she described to Mr. Portnoy her rape fantasy. A little weird, but I guess we got the text messages to prove it. Defendants went on to describe and entirely fabricate a series of events, namely that Mr. Portnoy choked and raped Madison. It was so rough, I felt like I was being raped. It hurt, and I was literally screaming in pain. She recalled crying and shouting, too much, and it hurts. I kept trying to get away, and he was like, stop running away from me, stop running away from me. After the purported rape, defendants reported that Madison slept on the couch for 2 additional nights before flying back home. Then, in paragraph 43, another important part, Dave Portnoy publicly disclosed his communications with Madison that clear his name while still taking steps to hide her actual identity. The defendants totally rejected. So again, at this point, this is not Dave Portnoy's side of the story versus the alleged victim side of the story. This is actually in black and white, saved text messages or DMs on social media that prove what's in your story is false. And if you're given that information, you have a duty to retract the story, make a correction. You cannot defame or speak against somebody while knowing what you're saying is false. Again, bringing this back to Cardi B and Tasha K. That is why the jury found in favor of Cardi B. They knew it was false. We'll talk about whether or not truth can be a defense, but at this point, there's objective evidence going towards Business Insider that they're totally rejecting and deciding not to pay attention to for entertainment purposes, whether they admit it or not. And that's what Tasha K admitted on the stand, that she did it for entertainment purposes. So then we go on to learn a little bit more about Madison. She has a Finsta account, a fake Insta account, and a OnlyFans page where she basically gets paid to put on a certain kind of Instagram account and get these people to watch. And that's how she kind of climbs the ladder. And one of her options of one of her videos said, Portnoy was a dick and lame and grumpy. He gets a 2 out of 10 for me. If he ever truly pisses me off, I have lots of content to expose him with. I'm going to stick to athletes with a bunch of money signs. Then, after a picture of Portnoy and Donald Trump, in the caption she wrote, okay, not my proudest F. Again, doesn't sound like someone who's been raped and abused. I think an average reasonable person can look at that and say, I don't know, man, this seems tough. And again, this is Portnoy filing this lawsuit, which you can tell it's written in a totally different way than when we look at like the Deshaun Watson lawsuits, if you remember those. Those were filed by the victims, and we have the words of the victims, and we see the perspective of the victims, and we can understand kind of where they're coming from and how it's happening, whether you believe them or not. Same thing again, like R. Kelly and Cosby and all these cases where we hear about the victim's point of view. But from here, we're seeing all this evidence the defendant has, the alleged defendant, he's the plaintiff in this case, Portnoy, so I'm probably confusing you, but the accused, Dave Portnoy, who's accused of this wrongdoing, he's coming out firing shots. He's coming out on the offensive. He's putting it out there, which is risky because a lot of lawsuits could follow now, and even some criminal investigation could follow now based on a lot of these facts and what Business Insider said. And it's kind of interesting that Business Insider did all these stories and have all these accounts of things that are criminal and should have civil lawsuits with them, but we haven't heard much about that. Maybe we will now, but I haven't seen any criminal investigation from any of these allegations for Dave Portnoy. And I haven't heard of any settlements that he's had with any of these women. So next, they go into the promotional campaign of Insider and how you have to pay $49 and you have to pay to read these stories, and how Dave Portnoy, he is the face of their story and trying to get people to come and pay for it because, again, they're showing that they're making money off this, number one. And I guess now is a good time to talk about truth. Truth is a defense to libel and defamation, but it's not an absolute defense. Because if you still have malice and you can show actual malice that you're doing this to hurt somebody and so you can profit off of that, then there still could potentially be a claim for libel or defamation or slander. However, public figures are treated differently. Public officers, maybe like the president, and public figures like Dave Portnoy. He puts his life out there, so he could be treated differently as a plaintiff if these allegations are true. I think that based on some of these campaigns, we can show actual malice, that even if they're true, they were doing this to hurt Dave Portnoy. And I think there's some emails and some social media posts that show they're doing this to hurt Dave Portnoy and to make money and to get him canceled, which we'll scroll down now. We might as well talk about it now. And this is the Barstool Sports query, which is an email they sent to someone who works with Barstool and Dave Portnoy. I have a brief query regarding advertising. Since blank has partnered with Barstool Sports in the past, I would like to ask whether the leadership was aware of this recent story, and they link to their story, about that company's founder, and if so, whether there may have been any discussions regarding those partnerships and or ad placements. So they're now sending these stories to advertisers as if they were going to make it any easier to connect lost revenue to Barstool Sports or damages to Dave Portnoy. They're literally going after their advertisers, sending them this story. That is actual malice. I think he can show actual malice. Now, whether or not it matters may not make a difference because he may still be considered a public figure, but at the same time, it's very clear that their argument is these allegations were false. and Business Insider knew or should have known that they are false. You cannot just turn a blind eye to objective evidence that what you're publishing is false. There's more. And now we have Kayla. Paragraph 66. The second story alleges that Kayla first messaged Mr. Portnoy on Instagram in the summer of 2017 and took an Uber to Mr. Portnoy's house to visit him. Again, similar MO. They reach out to him. They slide in his DMs. Imagine what his DMs look like. How many girls are just sliding into his DMs all the time and trying to come out to meet him. Paragraph 67. Defendants further allege that Kayla and Mr. Portnoy had violent sex and that it was just way too much. Kayla further alleges that Mr. Portnoy filmed her without permission. Now we get some of those allegations. However, despite Mr. Portnoy's alleged violent and non-consensual conduct, Kayla was eager to see Mr. Portnoy again. About a month later, Kayla again visited Mr. Portnoy at his home in New York. Defendants went on to report that the sex during her second encounter was far rougher than she had anticipated and would have agreed to had she been asked. Kayla further admitted, yes, it was technically consensual sex, but that was not the sex I consented to. I mean, this is something. This is really something, and I think we're seeing why there are not criminal complaints and criminal causes of action coming here, and even civil ones at this point, because even the alleged victims are admitting it was consensual. Paragraph 70. Defendants also falsely reported that Mr. Portnoy attempted to force Kayla to have anal sex during this encounter and that Kayla had injured her rib from rough sex. At a minimum, the second story implies Kayla's encounter with Mr. Portnoy was not consensual and was so impermissibly violent as to constitute sexual assault. So at this point, Portnoy's lawyers could be putting words in their mouth saying that it's actual sexual assault, not that they actually claimed that. These allegations are provably false. Mr. Portnoy and Kayla engaged in consensual sex, and defendants were fully aware of that fact. Indeed, in messages that post-date the alleged violent sexual encounters between Kayla and Mr. Portnoy, Kayla repeatedly referred to those past interactions in only positive terms. In March of 2019, after describing a really good, albeit scary, aggressive sexual encounter she supposedly had with another male celebrity who, according to Kayla, would pin her down, choke her a little, slap her around a little, and bite her, Kayla teased Mr. Portnoy about his sexual prowess and suggested that they get together again. Several months later, in an unsolicited text message, Kayla informed Mr. Portnoy that he would 100% get laid if he could help her find a home for a certain rescue animal. And while the second story claims that it took Kayla months to process what had happened to her, 2 years after the alleged non-consensual encounter, Kayla again messaged Mr. Portnoy, "Miss that dick." And then more text messages that you can see don't sound like they're coming from someone who's been raped and someone who's been seriously hurt and hospitalized from another person. This is objective evidence when you actually have the text messages and the DMs. It's not just someone's word. You have to take this more seriously if you're Business Insider and this is sent to you. But if they're making all this money off trying to cancel Dave Portnoy, you can see why they turned a blind eye to this. And then, damn, you still hold my title for most aggressive sex. Dave Portnoy, I like that title. And then a winky face. Again, Mr. Portnoy's counsel provided defendants with the true facts and documentation concerning Kayla, but Insider ignored the information because of their preconceived agenda. In particular, Insider was made aware that critical text messages were available to them, but Insider again did not even request copies of them from Mr. Portnoy or his attorneys. Where Insider did include information from Portnoy, Insider made an affirmative effort in its presentation to minimize its import. Then they talk about Insider's second promotional campaign, again, which is similar to the first. And those are the general facts we're going to go over, that it seems like there are some similarities to Cardi B. And at the end, I'll talk about the very big difference that's going to come in this case. All right, count one, defamation. Defendants published their false and defamatory first story and second story of and concerning Mr. Portnoy with a knowing and reckless disregard of the truth, and thereby caused and continue to cause Mr. Portnoy damages. So that's what they have to prove, that they knew, or with reckless disregard, that they were posting false and defamatory things about Mr. Portnoy and causing him damages. So it was hurting his reputation, which is another thing that's going to be interesting for him to prove, is does this hurt or help his reputation, because he's known as kind of a playboy and he's known as coming out swinging and fighting the big guy, and it's kind of interesting, kind of plays into his role. But I do think being called a rapist is per se defamation, per se libel, whatever you want to say. It's per se this kind of problem. So yes, if they prove that it's knowingly false or they disregarded recklessly the truth, in order to print this stuff to make money and cause him problems, then boom, that's what they're trying to prove. The clear and essential gist and sting of defendants' overall publications is that Dave Portnoy is a rapist, an abuser of women, and a person who secretly records women having sex without their consent. Mr. Portnoy sues here based upon the overall knowing, slanted, false, and defamatory sting of the publications in their entirety, as well as over specific statements set forth in the publications, which are too numerous to allege here in their entirety. And then they do allege a lot of them. I was screaming in pain. The sex during the second encounter was rougher. He attempted to have anal sex without my permission. He didn't ask. He just liked to force it. All those kind of quotes. And again, they list a bunch of them. The stories are defamatory per se, in that the stories falsely accuse Mr. Portnoy of having committed a crime or crimes, including sexual assault and unlawful recording. Defendants compounded their wrongdoing by continuing to publish and promote their defamatory stories, and by failing and or refusing to retract or update the stories even after they were notified that the clickbait headlines, leads, and substance of the stories were false, unsupported by documentary evidence, and defamatory. So again, truth is going to be used as a defense in this case. Business Insider is going to say they were true. Dave Portnoy believes they were false, and he gave Business Insider every opportunity to see that they were false. That is going to be the big linchpin in this case. There's going to be no doubt that this was published, that people read this. There's no doubt that he was even targeted at advertisers of Mr. Portnoy. There's no doubt that this was a smear campaign. They wanted people to know. They wanted to cancel him based off what they said he did in these articles. There's no doubt about that. But the big difference between this case and the Cardi B case is that Tasha K admitted that she knew the claims were false, and she published them anyways. She put them out there anyways. People heard them and read them and saw them, and Cardi B was damaged, and Tasha K knew what she was doing was wrong. That's actual malice, and that's false. There's no truth there. I would be shocked if Business Insider ever admits that they know these claims are false. If they ever admit that they had objective evidence showing these things were false. It's always going to be like some people say in openings, two sides to the story, right? There's two sides to your hand. If I show you my hand, oh, you think you see everything, right? But there's two sides to every story. And that's what Business Insider is going to go with. They were told these stories by the victims. Dave Portnoy's got a side of the story, but so do the victims, and we believe the victims, and we had a good faith basis for writing these articles. That's what they're going to argue. So what's going to be really interesting is what do these alleged victims say? Because I think I've seen on Dave Portnoy's social media, I looked through some of it before doing this video, he seems to think that a lot of these victims are going to come out and support him. And I think there was a sex tape in the past where he and a girl were, it was released unbeknownst to them. And I think they did some stuff, involved law enforcement, maybe filed some lawsuits there. And she was complimentary of him and saying he didn't really have anything to do with it. He didn't do anything wrong. It was consensual. And some other, of his escapades in the past have actually come out and support him, even though they're not with him anymore, because they kind of realize what the game is at this point. So if they come out and support him, Business Insider's in trouble. Unless they have recordings like, when a reporter's doing a story and they put down a recorder. If these women lied to Business Insider and they have those recordings, or they can prove the stories came from the women, if they lied to Business Insider, again, they don't know that what they're doing is false. They think it is true. That's going to be the big linchpin here. Did they or should they have known, without being reckless and disregarding the truth, that what they were publishing is false? And I think it's got to come from more than just Dave Portnoy's word. From this complaint, it seems like he has more than his word. So let me know right now, after just seeing the complaint, who you think is ahead on this defamation cause of action. Are you more with Portnoy at this point or more with Business Insider? Leave it in the comment. Now, let's get to count 2, which is interesting. Invasion of privacy. Mr. Portnoy has the right to be free from unreasonable, substantial, or serious interference with his privacy. His rights to privacy include the right to be alone and a right to be free from the public disclosure of private facts and information without his consent. Defendants releasing and publishing Mr. Portnoy's highly personal text messages and social media messages amounted to an unreasonable, substantial, and serious interference with an invasion of Mr. Portnoy's privacy in violation of whatever, his common law rights to privacy. As a result of defendant's invasion of Mr. Portnoy's privacy, Portnoy was humiliated, felt invaded and ashamed, and suffered a violation of his privacy, dignity, and personal integrity. As a result, he suffered harm, injury, and damages. Now, This is the cause of action for me that's much tougher to swallow. Dave Portnoy puts himself out there willingly. He is a public figure. His fame is basically his jokes, his wild stories, his late night stories, his escapades. He talks about his DMs. He puts his text messages out there. He puts his DMs out there, as he did in this case, for the world to see. So I think it's going to be tough to show that they invaded his privacy any more than he did. And I mean, he could say that's my right to do it because they're my text messages. But again, it's different than just your average person who never posts a private text message online, who never posts a private video, who never tells anybody about their private life. That's different than the way Dave Portnoy lives his life. Now, not to say that somebody can make those decisions for him. I'm just saying if I'm looking at this complaint, I think the defamation cause of action has a much stronger chance of being successful than this invasion of privacy cause of action. Let me know. Again, for count 2, invasion of privacy, who you kind of lean towards after hearing some of these facts, Portnoy or Business Insider. Leave it in the comments. Let me know what you think about this case. Let me know any questions you have. We'll continue to follow it. I'm sure it's going to get a lot of media coverage. But thanks for joining us. We wanted to jump in early and quick and talk about this complaint as soon as we saw it.